Alright, I'm going to review the book, The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, the unabridged edition at least. Alright, before we begin the video, I'm going to begin with a brief introduction. My name is Ian Crisp, and I have written one short story about World War I, and I will leave a link in the description of this video in case you want to check it out. It's very short though, unfortunately. Alright, and now onto the actual review. Alright, so The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells was written in 1898. Now, H.G. Wells was born in 1866 and died in 1946. So he lived about 80 years. He died at the age of 80, or 79, or 81. One of those three. And so, the book by H.G. Wells is around 140 pages, the same as Animal Farm by George Orwell. H.G. Wells also wrote The Time Machine. He also wrote The Invisible Man, which I unfortunately do not own. Now, War of the Worlds is a very popular and cultural book throughout the ages, because there was the 1953 movie, there is the 1978 musical version, which I own in record and vinyl. And then there's the 2005 Steven Spielberg movie, and then there's even the 2025 Ice Cube War of the Worlds, which doesn't look too good. But still, it's a very cultural book, and very famous book, actually. So, the plot of the book is that aliens from Mars invade Earth in Victorian England and Woking, which is actually where H.G. Wells lived, which is pretty interesting. And so, in the book, what happens is that the narrator, which we do not know the name of the protagonist, unfortunately, spots these, like, eruptions coming off from Mars, shooting from Mars, but, you know, they think that the chances of anything coming from Mars are very low, according to the book. And so, this happens for 10 days. There's 10 cylinders that shoot out from Mars, or explosions at least. Now, the first cylinder arrives in Hoarse Common in Woking. And so, a lot of people gather around in a sort of crowd, a cordon around the cylinder, and watch it. And so people believe that there's a man inside because it's like slowly unscrewing from the inside. When the top finally falls off, there's this creature, organism in there that's actually the alien, but we don't know that yet. This rounded bulk with 8 or 16 tentacles, I can't remember, and it has like skin like wet leather, and it has like a beak, so sort of like a head. It's kind of just a head, a circular mass that has tentacles and a beak on it. And so this like long metallic beam shoots up from the thing, and this heat ray incinerates a group of humans nearby, so everyone runs off from the pit. And the narrator eventually returns back to his house. And so, the next morning, or Sunday, or Saturday in the book, he takes his wife and flees walking and goes to Leatherhead, which is about 2 miles off. And so he borrows this cart, which he eventually has to return after dropping off his wife at Leatherhead at their cousin's house, returns to Woking, and discovers that has been destroyed, and that there's this fighting machine that they use that's like a tripod, with 3 legs. It's kind of a dome on top of it. It has like a cylinder. That was the actual cylinder, and they built it. And so he goes and hides in his house. And so he meets up with this artilleryman, and the more cylinders are falling. There's like, I think 2 or 3. Yeah, it was the 3rd one as he passed into Woking. And so the artilleryman describes how his group of soldiers was wiped out by the Martian's heat ray, and how they had all these fighting machines, and how they killed all these men and incinerate them with their heat ray. And so he ran off and hid under like a dead horse for a while until, of course, coming to the main character. So they set off for London, and on the way, oh, my bad. Sorry, guys. And so on the way, they come upon the town of Byfleet, and they see these 6 cannons lined up that are hidden behind trees with the gunners by their side. And so they go to the town of Weybridge, and the Martians, about 4 Martians, invade the town, attack the town, and a 5th one even comes over, and they release these deafening howls, which I'm not going to do, of course, but it's like a sort of like an ooh-la sort of thing. Actually, that is how it is in the book. And so the narrator and the artilleryman get split up, and so the narrator dives for the river and hides there until he is, of course, forced out by the heat ray that scalds the water. And so one of the cannons decapitates a fighting machine, and they eventually carry away, the other 4 fighting machines carry away the debris of their fallen comrade. And so, yeah. And so then the narrator goes on a boat he finds, and he eventually makes his way and meets this guy who's a curate. Of course, in the musical, his name is Nathaniel Parson, but there's no name given in the actual book. So he meets up with him, and they set out for London or whatever. And so then the narration splits off to his brother. His brother's in London at the time, and he has no clue about the Martian invasion. And so he tries to send a telegram to his brother because, like, the railways are cut off from walking, and they have no reason, like, no knowledge of why. But it never actually reaches him. And so eventually the Martians are spotted off of London, and there's this great exodus from London, and they all start fleeing. And so his brother meets up with these 2 ladies, and they take a carriage, and they make their way to the Essex coast in the UK, and then they secure some seats on a ferry and start making their way off when more fighting machines come over by a hill nearby. So there's this ironclad, it's called the Thunderchild, and it takes down 2 of the fighting machines, and the fighting machines have this new weapon, I forgot to mention back then, with the narrator that's like black smoke. It, like, instantly poisons or kills a human in, like, a couple of seconds of breathing it, of inhaling it, or just even not even inhaling, just touching it, really. And so eventually the 3rd tripod just burns the Thunderchild, and then but the narrator's brother makes it off to, like, France or Germany or something, Imperial Germany, or like the French Empire or whatever, or Belgium or Netherlands or something like that. So, and then switches back to the actual main character, or the protagonist, the narrator, who, with the curate, they start raiding these houses, and the 5th cylinder falls, and they get buried under its rubble. And so they're trapped there for 15 days. And so the curate, being extremely religious, on the 9th day thinks that he can kill the Martians with his prayers, because they're just devils in disguise or minions of Satan. And so the main character, before he can, go out, he kills, or not really kills, or knocks unconscious the curate. And so the Martians actually explore the room, because they were previously building the fighting machines in the pit they made near the house. And they grab the body of the curate, and they drag him off. And so the narrator leaves the house and makes his way for London. And so he meets up with the artilleryman again, who describes his way of life, that humanity is doomed, and there's something they can do, and that they should all flee underground to build a new society. And he says that since the rain, there's a previous thunderstorm the other day, and so the drains of London are sweet and clean after all the rain, that they should start a society underground. And he shows him, like, this hole he's done, and the narrator thinks that he could have done that in a day, and so he decides to leave the artilleryman and sets out for London. And when he's actually inside of London, there's no one there, and there's, like, no one in London because all the exodus and everything. And so he sees these 3 fighting machines. One of them's calling out like a distress signal or something. And so he goes up to he sees the 3rd one has a suicidal thought to go and give his life to the Martians, and he finds out that they've all been wiped out by the most minute and invisible bacteria. Yep. Which is actually a pretty interesting ending for the time. And so he goes back to his house and is grieving because he thinks that his wife is dead. But she eventually meets up with him, And then that's the end of the book. Now, my personal opinion is that the ending of War of the Worlds with the bacteria killing all the Martians is actually quite advanced for the time. Now remember, this book was written in 1898, so only about, I think, 20 years earlier, the idea of bacteria was conceived, and so that's quite advanced. The main theme of this book, I think, is to not think yourself as like supreme, like the supreme culture or race, because there could be more superior life out there, and to not do ethnocentrism of yourself and everything else. So that's probably the main point that Wells wanted to conceive upon the human race while writing that book. Now, it's personally one of my favorite books. The writing is very detailed, and it's a nice read for about 140 pages. But yeah, it's actually a very good book. I think if you're interested in that science fiction, classical literature kind of books, then it'd be pretty right up your alley. I mean, it was the first alien invasion book, so it was the ending is very advanced for its time as well, and the writing is just descriptive and good. Plus, you get to listen to the sweet musical if you actually have read the book, which is very good, by the way. And there's one quote which I think, to further elaborate the theme that to not think yourself as supreme in other like cultures or races or organisms, that Kepler reads this: "But who shall dwell in these worlds if they be inhabited? Are we or they the lords of the world? And how are all things made for man?" From Kepler, quoted in the Anatomy of Maholia. Yeah, this quote is to further elaborate the main theme of War of the Worlds, to not think yourself as superior than other, races or organisms, really, not really races, but yeah, it's a very actually interesting book. I think you should read it, dude. And so, that was my review, and Chris' review of The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Of course, read the book, very good. Of course, you can also read Time Machine or The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. And, of course, give the musical a listen to by Jeff Wayne. It's about 1 hour and 35 minutes long, I would believe. And, hold on. And the next review I'm going to do is over The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick. Another one of my favorite books. That should be published created about next week. So yeah, enjoy. This is Ian Crisp's review of The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.